Welcome back to the Grad Centric Podcast. Today we're going to talk about everybody's favorite subject, public speaking. And if the topic of public speaking causes you to get nervous as you're watching this video, know that you're not alone. It's estimated that 75% of the population struggles with this idea or the execution of public speaking in their everyday environment. And for some that might be work. For some, and who are watching this video, of course, it might be college. So let's talk about public speaking, what I think are the best tricks in order to succeed in this area. And there's probably no way that you're going to be able to get around this. Most curriculum in the college environment have some type of public speaking requirement for you. So how do you survive or hopefully thrive in your public speaking course? The first thing I would say is impress people by not using your notes. Now you may think that that's impossible, that you're going to be so nervous you need your notes. Well, with practice I can tell you it's not necessary to use notes when you speak publicly, and you've probably seen this before. There are many individuals who use notes or some type of teleprompter system and some that don't. So how are those individuals that don't use notes? How do they do that? Well, of course, some are just speaking off the cuff, but others have learned techniques to not use notes. And the technique that I would share with you, and I have shared with you in previous episodes, is this idea of mnemonics. And specifically, there's one technique that I've outlined in the blog post that's attached to this episode for the podcast. There's one in particular that's really helpful when it comes to speeches. So that technique is essentially association and using mental imagery to think of your next topic on the speech. So again, I can outline it in detail in the blog post. It's hard to do that in a podcast episode like what you're listening to right now, but know you can visit gradmetrics.com and see that content and practice that technique. So that's the first thing I would say is use a no notes technique in order to impress people, because when individuals see that you're not using notes, not only is it impressive, but they forgive more errors because they realize you don't have notes, right? When we use notes and we use crutches like PowerPoint, not that PowerPoint is bad necessarily, we'll talk about that here in a second, but when you use those crutches, there's not as much leeway that's given to you because everybody can use those aids in speaking. So don't use notes. The next thing that I would say is let's visit PowerPoint and let's visit some of these other techniques. So most individuals, when they're speaking in a public environment, are using PowerPoint. And there's a good way to use PowerPoint and there's a bad way to use PowerPoint. You've probably seen this if you're listening and you're in the work environment right now, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Some individuals use PowerPoint and they read verbatim off the slides because they're so nervous and they just feel like that they have to do that in order to get through the presentation. That's the wrong way to use PowerPoint. PowerPoint is really supposed to be a reference that your audience can use in order to stay with you and to keep on point when you're speaking, but really the presenter should not be leaning on PowerPoint at all. They should know from their heart what they're going to speak about, or at least covering sequentially maybe those points on PowerPoint, but going beyond that, explaining in detail what's not on the slides, going beyond the slides. That's going to give you some good practice if you're practicing that technique of going beyond what's on the PowerPoint slides. It's also going to give you a good grade when you're in the class, or at least better than if you were to read verbatim off the PowerPoint slide. It makes you look unprepared when you do that, which can be a real challenge even if you are prepared to pass that message on to whoever's grading you, your professor, of course. Practice is another big piece. Now, a lot of people don't practice their speeches and they get so nervous around speaking that they don't practice at all, and that just makes it worse. So make sure to practice. Then use things other than PowerPoint. That's another way to get an easy win with your professor to look impressive, is to use other technologies that go beyond PowerPoint. Now, PowerPoint is adding more in terms of interactivity and design, but there are a number of alternatives out there, Prezi being one that comes to mind, that offer zooming and interactivity, all sorts of different things that make your PowerPoint look, or I even said it, PowerPoint, make your presentation look really slick. The next thing I would say is passion can also be an important piece. If you're just speaking to something that you don't care about, that can actually increase the nerves. If you speak on something that's a passion of yours, sometimes it can flow and be a little more interesting, not only for you, but for your audience. And I would also say in that regard, try to pick subjects, if you're allowed to pick whatever you're speaking about, that are interesting, that are unique. Because again, that's going to grab the attention of your audience, and that's going to make it easier for you to get through the presentation when you know that your audience is interacting with you in a positive way. Finally, I would say one other thing that again may not seem like it's going to help you that much, but it probably will, are visualization and meditation techniques. So visualizing your speech and visualizing it going well, performance athletes use visualization all the time. It's another way to practice, which is something that I've emphasized in this podcast episode. Practice makes perfect. Visualization can really help. And then on the nerve side, when it comes to meditating and putting visualization together, it can be really powerful to ease some of those nerves that you're feeling. Okay, those are some of my best tips and tricks for giving a presentation at the college level. Hopefully this is helpful. If it is, definitely leave me a comment or shoot me an email at jason@gradmetrics.com. I'm happy to add to this and give you more information as needed.